I think I just kicked everyone off, but we're back. Hit the wrong button. Back at it Thursday morning. Hopefully you guys are able to rejoin as we've got plenty to tackle here with Bishop on Air. Good morning, everyone. Some of you joining us after rejoining us, so appreciate that. Hit the wrong button this morning, but we're back live. Let's make it happen.
There's a whole host of circumstances that would result in persons who possess these firearms incriminating themselves by filling out a form and sending it to the state police, which is a criminal law enforcement agency.
That's Attorney Thomas Magg talking about the Fifth Amendment arguments that he's bringing forward as part of the ongoing question of the state's gun ban registry that kicks in on January 1st, just days away. So yesterday we did review that Attorney Thomas Magg. He has filed for review of the Fifth Amendment argument, and we'll review that here with Bishop on Air and also delve into some of the previous times we've talked with Thomas Magg about that Fifth Amendment argument, which ultimately he says has not been made. And this is a conversation from back months ago, from May of this year, when I connected with Thomas Magg to discuss where we're at with the Fifth Amendment argument, because Magg was the first attorney to actually file a lawsuit in state court, and then that was transferred to federal court, where he filed 3 charges, essentially. One was saying the gun ban registry violates the Second Amendment. You have another argument that the gun ban registry is too vague, unconstitutionally vague, and then you have an argument that it violates the Fifth Amendment clause of saying people don't have to incriminate themselves. They have a right against self-incrimination. So the Second Amendment argument had been addressed, at least on a preliminary action, going up to the appellate courts and being denied by the appellate courts. But the Fifth Amendment argument has yet to be made. They did make the vagueness argument, which Judge Stephen McGlynn in the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court denied from Attorney Thomas Magg. But when I talked with Magg back in May, he discussed the issue of the Fifth Amendment challenge and when we're going to see that.
The Fifth Amendment argument has not been presented to the court yet. The Fifth Amendment, among other things, protects persons. It protects the right of persons not to incriminate themselves. The state police are, of course, going to, if the statute's not otherwise blocked, require people to fill out forms, presumably under oath, setting forth make, model, and serial number of certain firearms that they possess. That puts those persons at risk of the state taking that exact information and using it against the owners of those firearms to try to obtain criminal convictions against them for what have you, including but not limited persons that may have acquired firearms during this 6-day window. Their FOID card might have expired and then was renewed 30 days later. There's a whole host of circumstances that would result in persons who possess these firearms incriminating themselves by filling out a form and sending it to the state police, which is a criminal law enforcement agency.
So Magg making that argument that the Fifth Amendment really is something that has not been addressed at all, as a lot of preliminary actions have been taken. But what about the Fifth Amendment argument that Magg's making? Some of the details on that from a conversation I had with him spanning back all the way to August of this year. More detail about that Fifth Amendment argument that Magg's making.
Haynes, Haynes, versus United States, 1968 U.S. Supreme Court, which was a trio of Fifth Amendment decisions by the Supreme Court in 1968. That one concerned the National Firearms Act as it registered firearms as defined under the Act, machine guns, sawed-off shotguns, that kind of things, to register them with what was then the IRS, today we call it the ATF. The Supreme Court ruled that particular statute was unconstitutional because the registration data was available to other law enforcement agencies, like this registration data would be, and that there is no protections for the registrant having the information used against them. And so the Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment. This particular Illinois registration requirement suffers from the exact same defects identified in Haney's 50-something years ago. And you'd think that our legislature would have researched that issue, but apparently they didn't. And following the vagueness argument, depending on the outcome on that, is our intention to proceed with the Fifth Amendment portion of the challenge in our case. But one step at a time. We don't want to overwhelm the court, and we don't want to intermingle issues and get things confused.
So the issues obviously being filed now with the most recent brief here from Attorney Thomas Magg, which we'll take a look at in some detail as he has this filed to the Southern District of Illinois. And the judge in this case, Judge Stephen McGlynn, actually giving the state a time frame of when they should have a status hearing. I believe Judge McGlynn gave January 4th to be the status hearing on that. Yes, that's after the January 1st deadline. So it looks like that January 1st deadline is going to kick in. But Judge McGlynn, in a ruling that he issued denying a delay in that January 1st deadline in the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois case, saying that he wants to get to the merits of this issue sooner than later, saying that he wants to do it as early as January. And even in this case that Magg brought, saying that indeed they're going to be pushing for this into the merits of the case, making sure that they address the merits of the case. So Magg's filing on Friday led to the issue being raised as something that they're going to tackle on summary judgment in that Fifth Amendment argument. And while McGlynn said he wants a status hearing January 4th, you've got the state looking for a status hearing either on the 8th or sometime in the second week of January. That's just a status hearing. That could be, setting up the various measures that are needed for such a longer, maybe, hearing on the merits of the Fifth Amendment arguments. But Magg, in his argument that he filed, let's take a look here. He talks about how in previous U.S. Supreme Court precedents, the obligation to register firearms under PICA is similarly a function of having possession of a given firearm. Like in Haney's, not every possessor of a PICA firearm must so register. Goes on to say basically government actors are immune, and that's the issue of the equal protections, where you've got some in the security sector, law enforcement, retired law enforcement. They do not have to register their firearms. They could if they want to in the most recent rules, but in the current rules, they do have to register their private firearms. But we'll see what the second notice rules, if they get followed up on by the state with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. We'll see if they indeed do carve that out, saying that they don't have to register their private firearms. But the January 1st deadline is just around the corner with emergency rules in place. But you've got Magg saying that essentially, in previous U.S. Supreme Court precedent, possessors of these arms are a suspect class, at least by the current political class in the Illinois state government, and thus, at a minimum, could be used and abused by the state government and others, like the city of Chicago, with access to that information. So Magg making the case that it could be detrimental for individuals if they are to face criminal prosecution for not incriminating themselves, telling Illinois State Police that they have banned firearms. So back to the Magg filing that has a judge in the Southern District looking for a status hearing to move forward with this. And in the conclusion of Magg's filing, he says the 5th and 14th Amendment protect due process and rights against self-incrimination, requiring a person to register a given firearm, but not allowing them to list the actual manufacturer of the known to the owner is a due process violation, as it requires either making a false statement or not complying and risking punishment. Like under Haney's, the right to not provide information that could be reasonably used against you in registering a firearm bars any enforcement of any statute criminalizing the same. The bottom line is the same. The registration requirements are unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment for either lack of due process, violating rights against self-incrimination, or both. The remedy for the due process and self-incrimination problem is the same. Courts should find the existing prohibition of the possession of any firearm or item possessed in violation of the registration requirements of PICA violates the Fifth Amendment and enjoin enforcement of all such registration requirements under the present statute, including but not limited to any ban on possession of PICA-regulated firearms that have not been so registered. With the lack of listed manufacturers could potentially be remedied with software edits and temporary extension of the registration period. The self-incrimination defect is a factual law of PICA statute, just as it is under the original NFA, the National Firearms Act, as set forth in Haney's. Haney's remains good law and the unequivocal opinion of the Supreme Court. To that end, Mag says, this court has a duty to strike at a minimum the registration requirement of PICA. So that's essentially what they're looking for in Mag's filings. And what's interesting is when you read some of these, you can also really look at the footnotes, which shows that they're going to be doing some discovery in this case that's really going to get at the crux of some of the other looming questions about registration. For instance, in one footnote, footnote 2 of Mag's filing, it says it would appear that PICA registration database has largely been lifted from the U.S. Department of Justice Operation NCIC system, as it appears to use the same codes and abbreviations as the NCIC. It's unclear at this time whether the PICA system is actually connected to the NCIC system, but if it is, it may violate federal law. Discovery of this topic will be requested. So we're seeing a little glimpse of what some of the things that MAG could look for in discovery, and discovery is going to be discussed surely during a status hearing at some point. But of course, you've got the ongoing questions of the issue of registration, and Illinois State Police filing, at least updating their most recent numbers of PICA registrations. And let's take a look at this. You've got the updates of now 15,164, where the most recent update before yesterday was about 8,100. So it has almost doubled in just the past week's numbers. But that's still 0.63 of the 2.4 million total FOID cards. So 0.63% of the total FOID card registers. Here is Mag reacting to what he thinks is going to be really some of the outcome of that registration scheme, and is it going to produce the number of registrations that the state may be looking for in all of this?
I am told that Illinois once did have firearm registration, which was abolished in the 1970s, I think 1972. And as I understand it, the reason that Illinois abolished firearm registration in the 70s is they had a compliance rate in the teens. And as I understand it, other states that have required registration of semi-automatics have had registration rates of less than 25%. I think it's going to be a lot like prohibition, that there'll be lip service to it, a thriving black market, and very little actual compliance.
Show Attorney Thomas Mag saying that he doesn't think there's going to be much compliance with these numbers, and we'll see what happens with a status update on this case. Again, Judge McGlynn giving a January 4th status hearing date, but the state looking for a different date instead. So we'll be watching this space very close here with Bishop on Air. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow along, hit that notification bell as we go live to tape each and every weekday morning here with Bishop on Air on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and you'll be able to follow along with some of the clips from the program if you subscribe to it on Bishop on Air on YouTube. But you can also support the program by, checking out some of the store items either below here on YouTube, or you can go to bishoponair.com. Again, bishoponair.com. So much more coming up here with Bishop on Air. Stay tuned. And that's, again, subscribe, like, hit that notification bell. All right, let's make it happen. It's Bishop on Air. All right, stay tuned. We will connect with John Boch from Guns Save Life. He will join us in just a moment as soon as I get him what he needs to be able to connect with us here with Bishop on Air. So stay tuned. If John's listening on the live stream, we'll be there in just mere moments. So keep it here with Bishop on Air. All right, stand by. Getting ready to pull up John Boch with us here live. Some of the other things definitely want to keep you plugged in. We're going to talk about a little bit later on here is the ongoing migrant crisis impacting the city of Chicago, but also New York and Denver. Mayors there taking steps to ask for more federal funds. So we'll get into that conversation here in due order. So stay tuned for that. But looks like John Boch is joining us. And just give me a thumbs up, John. Can you hear me? Go ahead and let me know I can hear you. All right, looks like we can hear him as well. So let's get this party started here with Bishop on Air. All right. So far, 0.63% of Illinois firearm owner identification card holders have registered firearms, and the deadline, January 1st, is going to kick in after courts have denied moving forward with delaying that January 1st deadline. To react to that and to see what happens here in the future, joining us on Bishop on Air is John Boch. He is the executive director of Guns Save Life. John, thanks for taking time with us this morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Pleased to be here. Great job on this new show.
Well, it's all from the confines of my home, so welcome into my home, at least virtually via Zoom, so I appreciate you taking the time with us. Let's get on into it, because those registration numbers, of course, I've been given that rate of FOID card holders that have registered, but you're looking at it from that other side of people who haven't registered. What does that number look like?
I am. the governor likes to say we've had thousands of FOID card holders have complied with the registration scheme. My response to that is there are millions of gun owners in Illinois who haven't registered a thing. 99.4% non-compliance rate. That's pretty astounding, and it's got to be pretty humiliating for the governor and his buddies like Bob Morgan and other people who advocate for gun control against the law abiding instead of going after gang members and violent criminals in Chicago who are the ones shooting up the city and killing people. Instead, they come after law abiding gun owners trying to make us criminals because we won't register our self-defense firearms.
So, John, still with that, though, I'm sure a lot of people who are looking at the January 1st deadline wondering what they can do. From your understanding of PICA, the Protect Illinois Communities Act, the ban on 170-plus semi-automatic firearms and attachments and 50 caliber ammunition and such, what options do they have?
Well, they have several options, ranging from completely legal to just completely ignoring the law is a conscious decision to ignore the law. But first and foremost, they could surrender the gun to police. They could destroy the firearm. They could sell the gun to somebody who's an exempted person or an FFL to sell out of states to another gun owner somewhere else in the nation. They could always bury the gun. That's an option for people who have a place to bury it or to hide it, such as an old mausoleum. They could have a boating accident, a tragic boating accident, but if you have one of those, make sure you let DNR know you had a boating accident, or you could face a $150 or $200 fine. Other options include rehoming your firearm outside of Illinois. That's an option a lot of people, including myself, have chosen to get the gun out of Illinois and out of the reach of the governor. Of course, that's perfectly legal without any paperwork, as long as you don't bring the gun back into Illinois until this law is overturned in the courts, which I'm confident is going to happen probably late in 2024 at the latest, maybe early 2025. It's going to happen sooner or later, probably in the sooner end of the scheme of things. Last but not least, of course, people could just keep their mouths shut, keep their gun safe locked, and just keep a low profile, and they face a very, very low probability of police ever knocking on the door. And of course, if police do knock on the door, we urge people not to ask or answer any questions, not to consent to any searches. Gun owners should remember that it's not their obligation to prove to any Illinois State Police investigators they no longer have these particular firearms, but for the Illinois State Police to prove that these gun owners still have the firearm, care, custody, and control of the firearm. And if they don't have that, they're not in violation of the law.
John Boch joins us. He is the executive director of Guns Save Life, and the website is gunsavelife.com, or is it .org? Remind me on that one.
It's .com. I think .org will get you there as well. I also write for The Truth About Guns, the web's largest firearms blog. But Guns Save Life is the bread and butter for what I've been doing the last year or so here in Illinois, fighting this, in our view, unconstitutional and illegal legislation that targets gun owners instead of criminals.
John, you were also party of the lawsuit that was decided on Friday with Judge Stephen McGlynn denying that preliminary injunction on that January 1st deadline. Your thoughts on his ruling?
I think he's a very wise jurist. I have no faults in what his reasoning and logic were behind it. We've got a Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, three-judge panel there who has ignored the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Bruin, ignored that precedent, ignored their role as an inferior court to the United States Supreme Court. And until and unless we get around that through a ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court to counteract that three-judge panel, I think we're kind of in this box where we have to fight this out, argue the case on its merits, work our way through the appeals process, get to the U.S. Supreme Court, assuming there's not another case. I think there's about 5 other cases across the nation who are very similar to ours who may be accepted by the U.S. Supreme Court before we get there. Potentially one out of California that, coincidentally, is also run by the same legal group that we have. But Very optimistic that we're going to get these gun bans and magazine bans struck down in a, well, not quite as timely as we would like, but it's going to happen very soon here, and they're going to be thrown onto the dustbin of history to be a thing of the past. Things like separate but equal and things like that. Well, gun bans are going to be in that same category as some of these other earlier decisions and earlier laws that were just grossly unconstitutional to Americans.
John, of course, the gun ban and the magazine ban and registry, not the only thing that Illinoisans had to deal with in the state of Illinois. You've got the firearm owner identification card. You've had separate lawsuits dealing with that, and there's others floating around in there, even one from Attorney Thomas Magg in federal courts that could come up. What's your prediction heading into 2024 when it comes to the pre-purchase registration license scheme that seems to be being challenged elsewhere throughout the country as well?
Well, there are similar schemes that have been challenged elsewhere in the country. Our lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the Floyd Act in state court has been in place since, 2019, 4 years-ish, going on 5. Obviously, in 1791, there were how many states that had Floyd cards? Not a single one. So there's no text, history, or tradition that supports the Floyd Act, and it's going to be struck down. Right now, we're in the 4th District Court of Appeals here in Illinois. It doesn't really matter how they decide. It's going to get appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court next year. Ultimately, when the Illinois Supreme Court gets it, they can comport with the decision from the U.S. Supreme Court in Bruin, or they can try to get creative and, as I call it, stupid with it and come up with another one of these creative decisions, which we would at that point appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm pretty confident that Clarence Thomas and these other justices would accept an appeal on the Floyd card challenge because, again, there were no states that had a Floyd card in 1791. There's no legal precedence for it. And obviously it runs counter to the U.S. Supreme Court the U.S. Constitution that says shall not be infringed.
John, back to the gun ban and registry. When I asked the governor, 2 weeks ago, why have the registry? He first said he didn't understand the question and then said, well, we need to know where these dangerous firearms are for if there's another crime that may be committed with them. Your reaction to that, but also what are you hearing from some of your sources and as far as what could come in 2024 and especially for those who do register banned firearms?
Well, the governor, frankly, Greg, says a lot of things, and I can't help but think he's been partaking in some of that marijuana that's sold in dispensary stores across the state because he seems to be living in an alternate universe, an alternate world. What could happen? I think there's a lot of things that could happen, certainly. I don't think the Illinois State Police have the staff to go out and conduct enforcement raids. They may try to do some spot compliance checks for more prolific purchasers of firearms if their firearms are not registered with the Illinois State Police per this law. And at that point, I think it would be voluntary, although they might try to find a sympathetic judge in a sympathetic jurisdiction to maybe issue a warrant that there isn't really probable cause to suspect a criminal violation. They might try to go into some fishing expeditions like that. Potentially, we could have, as has been leaked to us, the governor asked for legislation to close the existing owner loophole after a mass casualty event next year, where the existing people who have dutifully followed the registration requirement of the law are given 90 days to surrender those registered firearms and accessories to the police, or they face an additional felony charge. And that's the story we're getting, is that the governor has welcomed this behind the scenes, and they've already planned it. And if there's a mass casualty incident, especially if it happens in Illinois, the governor is going to welcome this option for new legislation to close the existing owner loophole. And then again, existing owners who have registered would have 90 days to surrender their firearms to police or face a knock on the door from the state police asking, hey, you registered these guns. why didn't you surrender them within the window? We're here today to pick them up, or we're going to pick them up and take you to jail. And I think that's potentially on the horizon. Other things, we've got rumors that some people are trying to come up with workarounds to facilitate the Illinois State Police doing some fishing expeditions, again, trying to identify some of these people who have purchased firearms who may not be in, as they see it, compliance with the law. That's not how our country works, though. It's innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until you've proved your innocence by proving that you no longer have these guns in the state of Illinois. But a lot of things could happen. Obviously, the governor and people like Representative Bob Morgan are not going to sit by idly when there's 99.4% non-compliance with their precious little law. That, I think, is a very sore spot with them. I think they're losing sleep over that. I think they're very angry about that privately. We'll have to wait and see after the first of the year what their next steps are, but I have no doubt they're gaming this 2 or 3 steps into the future. And of course, we're trying to figure out what those plans are and trying to advise gun owners accordingly.
John Boch, the executive director of Guns Save Life, greatly appreciate you taking the time. We'll obviously be checking back in with you, especially heading into the new year. Hopefully you had a great Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you, all right?
You as well. Happy New Year, Greg. Congratulations on the new format. Love the show and keep up the great work. And we love watching you on the internet. And I encourage people to subscribe and to follow you along.
Well, I appreciate that endorsement there. And we'll definitely be talking again in the near future. John Boch, Guns Save Life. Greatly appreciate your time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Greg. Take care.
Also, as global residents of this entire world, it is incumbent upon all of us to recognize the global population shift that is happening is not going to end because someone is sending buses irresponsibly throughout the entire country. It's going to require Congress to organize, to come together, to do its part. We need the federal government to invest, but we also need to make sure that the governor of Texas does not take his animosity on the rest of the country.
We now have a hiring freeze that we cannot bring on additional employees to deal with everything from social services to actually cleaning our city. And that is what the breaking point looks like, what we are experiencing right now.
Anti-immigrant, illegal, call ICE, send them all back, waiting across the Rio Grande and don't obey our immigration and naturalization laws. Trump, come in here, clean this mess up. The most corrupt city in the United States is the city of Chicago, and that's not my...
Thank you, Mr. Blakemore, for your comments.
So there you go. Just some of the back and forth over the debate on immigration with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and a resident of Chicago raising concern about the ongoing migrant crisis, saying that they just need to be sent back. Bishop on air, back at it, and some of the developments over the past 24 hours on the issue of non-citizen migrants to the state of Illinois. You had New York Mayor Eric Adams join the mayor of Chicago and the mayor of Denver. And they discussed a variety of things when it comes to their ask of the federal government concerning the ongoing migrant influx. And here's a hint. They're not asking for the border to be closed. They're asking for more federal resources. Here's the New York mayor.
We cannot allow buses with people needing our help to arrive without warning at any hour of day and night. This not only prevents us from providing assistance in an orderly way, it puts those who have already suffered so much in danger. To be clear, this is not stopping people from coming, but about ensuring the safety of migrants and making sure they can arrive in a coordinated and orderly way. Chicago Mayor Johnson has already taken similar actions to coordinate orderly bus arrivals, and I'm glad our teams have been able to share lessons learned from where and what they are doing.
So Adams essentially is saying that they're going to mimic in New York what Chicago's done by allowing for the impoundment of buses that don't follow certain protocol, especially when it comes to non-citizen migrants being delivered. So you heard him, it's not them saying they're not going to be welcoming. So, I mean, nothing there about the federal government shutting down the border. But he did have an ask saying that the federal government needs to provide more resources.
But we need the state and federal government's help in resettling and supporting the 68,000 migrants still in our care, as well as those who are on their way and those yet to come.
So again, asking for more resources. He has stats on how many migrants are in New York.
And we've helped submit more than 23,000 work authorizations, TPS, and asylum applications. But we cannot continue to do the federal government's job. We have spoken to FEMA and other federal officials who have expressed concern about the border's surge, but not offered additional help. We need action, and we need it now.
So what that action is more resources, they say. Didn't really hear much from this joint news conference that they held between New York, Chicago, and Denver on closing down the border. But Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson talked about the steps they've taken in Chicago and some of the ramifications that they've seen because of their steps in Chicago.
As buses continue to arrive in the city of Chicago and all over the country, the type of chaos that has been administered has left many of our local economies under a tremendous amount of duress. Road buses arriving not just in the city of Chicago, but surrounding communities as well. Some neighborhoods as far reaching as an hour and a half outside of the city of Chicago. Buses sit by the governor of Texas, literally dropping families off in the middle of nowhere.
So
These
Johnson
families have experienced a great...
Johnson talking about the ongoing issue of these buses and the impact it's having on Chicago. He provided some stats yesterday during this news conference.
And over the past 7 months, we've received hundreds of buses, some in the middle of the night, and again, some in the outskirts of the city of Chicago, with little to no coordination. I've stood up 27 shelters. We are housing currently nearly 15,000 asylum seekers, providing mental health care, educating 4,500 students, while also creating a pathway to sustainability. But we cannot do this alone. We need more support from the federal government.
So again, he's asking for more funds and support from the federal government, and talked about what could be a possible breaking point in all of this.
Have reached a point where we are either close to capacity or nearly out of room. Without significant intervention from the federal government, this mission will not be sustained. But make no mistake about it, the road buses and now chartered flights is not only unsafe, but it's inhumane. So we are calling on not just the federal government to provide support and resources to address this humanitarian crisis. We also need better coordination at the border. The state of Texas has a responsibility to connect with municipalities around the country to help address and to deal with this crisis.
So he's talking about just having more coordination with the border. Again, not explicitly saying that the border needs to be shut down. Denver's mayor, he also talked about the impact that city's having. Mayor Mike Johnston saying that indeed they've got issues they're dealing with the migrant influx.
We at this point now have had more migrant arrivals to our city than any city in America per capita. And that is not because there is a thoughtful or coordinated strategy to entry it is because we are the first big city north of El Paso and the cheapest bus ticket and the shortest trip for the governor and others who are trying to find a place to send people. And
also a sanctuary city. But the Denver city officials dealing with more migrants than what Chicago's dealing with.
We've now received more than 35,000 migrants over the course of the last year. We have more than 4,000 that are in shelter tonight. That's more than 10 times the number that were there when I took office just 6 months ago. And we have incredibly been successful in integrating almost all of those migrants into the city. But as both mayors have mentioned, we know this is not the right strategy by which to help make newcomers be successful or help make our city successful. And so I just want to join Mayor Adams and Mayor Johnson in saying I think there are 3 very clear steps the federal government can take today that we want to see them take. One of those is we do need to dramatically increase work authorization for those folks who are arriving in our cities. Many people come to this country, they get paroled into the country with an asylum claim, but they'll come to Denver and they'll have a court date for that asylum claim that is April 23rd of 2027. That's 4 years away, and in the meantime, don't have capacity to work or to work fast enough. And so what we're asking for is that folks that are arriving and are paroled in come with work authorization so we can help them do what they want to do, which is support themselves and support their families. The second is we need more federal support to be able to manage this amount of inflow. It will crush city budgets around the country. As we know, we're looking at about $160 million of potential costs going into next year's budget. That's almost 10% of our entire city budget. That's a massive impact for us. And the third is we think if we have federal resources and we have work authorization, we also ought to be able to have a coordinated entry plan by which the country as a whole sets a strategy for where newcomers arrive and where they can be welcomed in a way that we know cities can successfully support.
So what, like an Ellis Island of sorts? Is that what they're looking for? Or in that 3 different asks that the mayor there from Colorado had, none of it was clamp down, no more entries, remain in Mexico, those types of things. Because, listen, Johnson, he's talking about how, this new wave of incoming migrants, obviously a reality on the streets of these 3 major cities. But he says it's just a new phase of global migration. Others would say that it's the policies of Joe Biden that has open border policies that's leading to this influx. But the mayor of Chicago responded to the governor of Texas, who, if you recall, bus after bus after bus comes. A few weeks ago, the city of Chicago started an impounding program for buses that aren't following certain protocol. And then the governor of Texas chartered a private flight to Chicago. Now we see that the governor of Texas is having buses drop people off outside of the city of Chicago, and that's something that's being impactful on communities all around the Chicago suburbs. But one thing that the governor of Texas has said is that this is because of the city's sanctuary policies. Governor Greg Abbott pushing back on the governor or on the Chicago mayor about the people who are, being sent. In a response, Governor Abbott's press secretary said Mayor Johnson is flat out lying. He says that if he truly cared about these migrants, he would stop spreading falsehoods and complaining about a few thousand migrants being being bussed into his sanctuary city. Instead, Mayor Johnson could call on President Biden to take immediate action to secure the border, something the president continues to fail to do. So Johnson instead reacts and essentially chastises the governor of Texas for essentially saying, hey, if you're a sanctuary city, we're going to send these migrants crossing the border because of open border policies from the Biden administration, and you should be welcoming those individuals to your sanctuary city. Here's Mayor Johnson.
Unfortunately, what the governor of Texas has done is that he has seen our desire to come up with a coordinated effort, and he has been provocated to retaliate against us establishing structure and calm. Sending planes to Chicago or anywhere else that are funded by the government of Texas, these private planes without a manifest, without knowing who's on the plane, without knowing what's on the plane is not just reckless, it's dangerous.
Others would say that it's reckless and dangerous to have an open border. And I think that's something that, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, has tried to highlight. And you got to think also about the flood of undocumented or non-citizens or those claiming asylum into these smaller communities along the border. Eagle Pass, El Paso. I mean, these are areas where they're smaller communities and they're getting hit with tens of thousands of individuals a day in some instances. But it's a burden on Chicago. Chicago Mayor Johnson yesterday during that news conference talked about how there's soon to be no more room in the inn. And you've got the mayor of Chicago talking about steps he's taking to get other cities outside of Chicago involved.
Last Friday, I convened about 80 mayors from surrounding villages and towns around the city of Chicago, because as a result of our ordinance, and this is something that Mayor Johnston and Mayor Adams have a preview to, is that as a result of our ordinance, the governor of Texas, looking to circumvent law, has sent buses to surrounding villages, towns, and cities. It's created a very chaotic situation. Many of you are aware, there's a town, Peatone, Illinois, well outside of the city of Chicago. The bus driver dropped off these families and told them they were in Chicago, and they were literally dropped off on the side of the road.
So the mayor saying this is starting to impact other cities. And we've seen the headlines. We've seen other communities address this to a degree, including last night, where you've got the town of Elburn Village. Their board voted unanimously last night to essentially ban unscheduled migrant bus drop-offs. ABC 7 reporting on this. We'll just take a look at this briefly. 2 suburbs voted in favor of new legislation designed to stop buses from dropping off migrants without notice. The Elburn Village board voted unanimously Wednesday night. You've also got the Elburn ordinance, like others, essentially saying that they are no longer going to accept these buses unnoticed. And Elburn Village administrators saying there will be a 15-day waiting period before the measure goes into effect. But that's not the only place. You've got others as well. Chicago Ridge voting on a similar measure. Rosemont and Aurora enacting ordinances. But even in last month, you had the village of Homer Township that made their own resolution. And this is Homer Township official Mike Bonomo reading a resolution from last month that they ended up passing.
A resolution establishing policy for immigration law and the enforcement of such laws with regards to safety and security for the residents of Homer Township. Whereas we believe in the rule of law, including immigration law, and whereas refusing to enforce immigration law jeopardizes the safety of and imposes financial burdens on our residents, and further is unfair to those seeking legal entry into America. And whereas refusing to enforce immigration laws is empowering drug cartels and victimizing women and children, many of whom have been exploited or killed while journeying to America. And whereas the federal government admitted it does not know the location or in whose care, if anyone's are some 85,000 unaccompanied minors granted entrance into America. And whereas the federal government admitted it does not know the location of several individuals on its terrorist watch list, granted entrance into America. And whereas many of the migrants who've been allowed to enter America have not filed asylum applications and therefore have no moral rights to be here. And whereas persons seeking entrance into America are not American citizens or legal residents and therefore are not entitled to the same benefits. And whereas Homer Township has limited taxpayer resources, we are obligated to use in services of those individuals, our lawful constituents. And now therefore, be it resolved, Homer Township will not accept nor provide taxpayer-funded services to migrants, and we shall return any individuals sent our way by elected officials from sanctuary states or cities to them, so that they may live their values just as we live ours, the difference being ours are consistent with the rule of law.
So again, it's a different type of ordinance that's being passed in Homer Township than what some of these other places like Elburn and the others, Rosemont, I think, that have ordinances about buses. So Homer Township saying, we're just not going to do this with our tax dollars. We're not even going to accept grants from the state if they say, hey, here's grant money if you take in these migrants. So different approaches, it seems. And I talked with Effingham County Board Vice Chairman David Campbell yesterday and got his perspective. And listen, he says they're looking at this issue as well.
We're trying to stay on top of this, Greg, and we've been watching this as it progresses. We have actually been working on a resolution, and it even may become an ordinance if we have to go, and put some teeth into it. And
he says, listen, they're open to non-citizens becoming citizens in the legal process, naturalization and such. They're open to that type of thing.
We're open arms for those type of people, but trying to push illegal immigrants into any county in Illinois, and Effingham County is one that I represent. We just don't want to see our taxpayers have to burden any of the medical or any of the other expenses that go along with housing or anything else. They shouldn't have to burden that type of thing with these folks coming in. They should have had a plan in place if they were wanting to bring them in. They didn't. I mean, that's quite obvious. Another issue is, if they come in and start taking up some of the jobs in the area that are available, that our local citizens won't have access to those jobs. Just not a good situation, and we're going to try to tackle it, with the resolution first. Just basically saying that we want them to come in legally. We're not going to allow any vagrants or any type of trying to get housing together for these people, tents or even solid structures. We're going to be watching that, and we're going to try to tackle it head on.
So clearly a lot of different ideas there as Effingham County works on their resolution. But they're in central Illinois. We have seen reports that there are signs along I-55 in some exits, some mile markers that say no migrant buses welcome this exit. And that's been reported from various areas throughout the state. So you've got that as well at play here. But with ordinances that are being passed in Elburn Village, for instance, about, busing in particular, you've got others like Homer Township and Effingham County looking at just saying, no, we're not going to accept this thing, period. But what should others do? David Campbell has a suggestion there.
I heard of that incident. I think it was up around Kankakee, just was the latest one I heard about. I think they're going to have to get with their legislators up in that area, state's attorneys and county boards, and their state legislators, and try to do the same thing. We've got most of our local legislators on board. We talk to them, while we're putting this together, state's attorney and whatnot, and all our other board members. So they're going to have to kind of do the same thing. They're going to have to tackle it head on and get it stopped before it starts. Unfortunately, some of those areas up there, it's already started, and they didn't get on top of it soon enough. But I don't think it's too late to address it. And if they brought them in, they're going to have to figure out a way not to burden the taxpayers on this, bringing these illegals in, and find a way to bring them in legally if they want to come in legally and stay and be a part of the United States and go through the process of becoming a legal citizen and not on the taxpayers' dime.
Again, it's David Campbell, the vice chairman of the Effingham County Board. In the state, it's a sanctuary state. It's not just Chicago and various other municipalities across the state that say they're a welcoming state who've passed similar ordinances saying, hey, we're not going to enforce immigration law. You're welcome here. But the state itself is a sanctuary state. Campbell says that needs to change.
Current administration, I don't see that happening, but we, again, do not, as far as downstate Illinois, we do not see that as a constitutional move. They're taking grabs at, trying to take these grabs on and turning these laws around and making them legal where they're not truly constitutional laws.
So again, David Campbell there from the Effingham County Board about possible action they're going to take. But back to the three mayors of the major cities in New York, Chicago, and Colorado. The Colorado mayor from Denver, Mayor Mike Johnston, says they're at their breaking points.
I think cities would have to look at dramatically reducing the amount of services we offered or dramatically cutting our city budgets, which has impacts on other parts of city services. And so those are the hard scenarios that we know our city would face, other cities would face. But we think there's a common sense path to avoid that, which is why we're pushing the Congress and the White House for action on these topics to make sure we avoid that.
But again, they're asking for more funds, not necessarily for the border to be shut down. Mayor Eric Adams talked about how the city's being impacted there. They're not able to, do proper cleaning. They're asking for 5% cuts across all city agencies in New York. They're definitely at a breaking point, he says.
We now have a hiring freeze that we cannot bring on additional employees to deal with everything from social services to actually cleaning our city. We're seeing them walking the street, knocking on doors, asking those who live in the community for different items and different things. We're seeing the erosion of the quality of life that we've improved on in such a short period of time of this administration. And we have been impacted. For many months, we were able to keep the visualization of this crisis from hitting our streets, but we have reached a breaking point. We're no longer able to do that because of the volume in numbers. Just last week.
Yeah, so the numbers continue with buses being sent to New York, to Denver, to Chicago. Here's Mayor Brandon Johnson. Again, not blaming the open border for the continued influx of non-citizens.
Also, as global residents of this entire world, it is incumbent upon all of us to recognize the global population shift that is happening is not going to end because someone is sending buses irresponsibly throughout the entire country. It's going to require Congress to organize, to come together, to do its part. We need the federal government to invest, but we also need to make sure that the governor of Texas does not take his animosity on the rest of the country.
So there you go. Some of the latest debate back and forth about non-citizen migrants coming to the state of Illinois from the southern U.S. border and what the major cities are asking for. They're asking for more federal funds, not necessarily for the border to be shut down, while others are saying the border needs to be shut down. All right, so there you go. That's just some of the latest. Again, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Each and every weekday morning, we wake up and give you some of the latest here. As I broadcast from my home, I did terrestrial radio for years, but I figured, you know what, with a growing online audience, might as well just work smarter, not harder. So you can help me do that by supporting the program, grab some merchandise, tell your friends, share it up on social media, and tune in each and every weekday morning here with Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. But subscribe on YouTube so you can get all the clips. All right, stay tuned. Time for the Council Corral, a review of last night's Springfield City Council meeting. I'm Greg Bishop. Typically, we do the Council Corral on Wednesdays, but they delayed their Tuesday meeting to Wednesday evening, so here we are on a Thursday doing a Council Corral. And it was a full committee of the whole last night. It's where they take a bunch of ordinances and determine if it's going to go on debate or on consent, and then the following meetings where they take final action. Some major things they talked about, including bonds, and that's when a governmental unit goes into debt backed with taxpayer resources to pay for things. You know, you'll typically see a school district sell bonds to be able to pay for new construction, but all that's based off of a tax increase that local voters may approve for themselves. That's something that came up last night. Also, you've got a couple of stories that indicate some trouble down the line for some rail projects in central Illinois, and in particular in Springfield, where things could get interesting with the federal government addressing the situation by not freeing up some funds initially. So we'll touch on that a little bit as well. Let's go ahead and get on into it with last night's Springfield City Council meeting, the Committee of the Whole. This is the Council Corral and an ordinance up for consideration. Let's go ahead and hear that.
An ordinance proposing the extension of an effective period for the existing Legacy Point Special Service Area, the issuance of Special Service Area bonds in an amount not to exceed $17 million to pay costs of certain special services, and setting a date and providing notice for a related public hearing for the Office of Corporation Counsel as amended.
Any discussion? Alderman Williams.
Yes, so corporate counsel, this 17 million is our portion of the deal?
Well, this 17 million is a portion of the total package that we have put together for financing. This particular portion, these bonds will be used for infrastructure, and the infrastructure, the specific infrastructure is laid out in the agreement as attached, broken down by project and estimated costs.
So this is concerning that Legacy Sports Complex, the Legacy Point Sports Complex. They've been talking years about this. They were going to get shovels in the ground over the summer, had a big ribbon cutting, but apparently there's still more steps that need to be taken. A couple of weeks ago, they approved a measure updating the agreement with the private contractor. Now they have to, free up funds for infrastructure to get this project going. But there's continued questions about, well, why is this taking so long? Are the taxpayers going to be protected here?
This particular ordinance extends the special service area tax and expands the special service area across MacArthur Boulevard. And extends that tax for the duration of the project. So this is not the total portion, this is the special service area portion. So there's still general bonds that will be issued, there's interim bonds that will be issued. The general bonds and those interim bonds are backed by the business district, which was expanded earlier this year by council.
So again, the business district taxes, because it costs more in sales tax at Legacy Point than elsewhere throughout Springfield, particularly with the eye on developing that part of South Springfield heading to I-72 on MacArthur. Alderman Williams continues with his line of questioning.
The developer is not required to have his portion, his 17 million in place?
So this is still subject to the second redevelopment agreement. So this authorizes bonds to be issued. This does not issue the bonds, but this authorizes the bonds, and sets a hearing date of March 5th. Proposed Amendment 1 sets the hearing date, but for March 5th. But in order for us to issue the bonds and then to actually pay out on the bonds, we're still on the 50-50 contribution. So it takes 60 days public notice, or it takes 60 days of passage of this ordinance before we can have a public hearing. So we're starting it now, but these bonds will not be issued until at least March.
So we got to have a public hearing about the bonds. So this really moves that step forward. But it's what, $17 million or something? The question about when will the money be paid out?
We will not pay any contribution unless and until the developer shows that they have paid an amount, and then we will match the 50%. So that requirement's governed by the second redevelopment agreement, which would cover these bonds.
And we'll see that before the bonds are issued, that he has his portion in place.
Well, the bonds authorize payment. We will not pay out on the bonds until we see his portions.
So again, it's a private private public partnership with the city to get this thing done, but we really haven't seen a lot of major construction move forward. We're already in the winter months, so likely getting all these things together so that they can get construction going in earnest heading into the spring months. We'll see. But some taxpayer dollars are going to be involved in all of this to build a sports complex. It's going to be considered to bring all kinds of sports tourism to Springfield for, little league teams and baseball and basketball and volleyball and indoor courts and outdoor fields and so on. The Corporation Counsel for the city, he provides some clarity to some other questions that were coming up.
This does not commit the city to actually issue the bonds and to make payments. This is very similar to the interim bonds that were approved in September of this year. So about a little over $2 million of interim bonds were approved at that time. The city still has not issued that bonds. We haven't gone through that process yet because, as we discussed at the last meeting, the financing commitments weren't fully there. We still have not issued those bonds, and this is similar. So again, we're talking months down the road. We're going to keep an eye, and we're not committed to we're committing to having a public hearing on March 5th. But if any of the protections that we've discussed at prior meetings, if those aren't met, if the city's not happy, then this ordinance will not commit us to actually issuing the bonds when the time comes. Okay. But it starts the process of extending that special service area and issuing these bonds backed by that.
And I think Alderman Redpath really distilled some of the concerns he's hearing from the questions into his question to the Corporation Counsel for clarity.
This is not a disbursement ordinance. The disbursement ordinance has to come back to us when we're ready to disperse those funds, correct?
This authorizes the bonds, but yes, if we're going to pay out of this, the council will know that the bonds have been issued, and then the council will know when payments are made.
Does that require a vote?
It would depend on the disbursement itself, but I believe we're going to bring ongoing disbursements to the council for approval.
So there you go. The idea of the Legacy Sports Complex, Legacy Point Sports Complex moving forward to some degree. A lot of different pieces falling into place, but it's been 3.5 years in the making, maybe even more if you talk about, Xanadu from years ago and just the overall decade plus of conversation about some kind of sports complex for the city of Springfield. Moving on, last night's Committee of the Whole dealt with a whole bunch of other ordinances. One is a $50,000 subsidy for a local small business association, and that's the Downtown Springfield Incorporated. They just had a change of leadership there where one of the leaders went to go work for the city. So here we've got an ordinance that would give $50,000 to Downtown Springfield Incorporated.
Ordinance authorizing execution of a professional services agreement with Downtown Springfield, Inc. to provide economic growth within the downtown district of the city of Springfield in an amount not to exceed $50,000 for the Office of Planning and Economic Development.
Move for consent. Move for debate, please.
Any discussion?
All right, so it looks like they're moving that towards debate instead of consent. And debate agenda is where they debate it next week. Consent agenda is lumped in with other non-controversial ordinances, and they vote all those together at once. So that's going to happen next week. But you had from Downtown Springfield Incorporated board members and other leaders, Tony Shearing and Jean Berner Giacano there as well. I think I pronounced that correct.
Please introduce yourself. Hi, Tony.
Good evening. My name is Tony Shearing. I'm the board chair for Downtown Springfield, Inc., and I will let Jean introduce herself.
Hi, good evening. Jean Bruner Giacano. I'm temporary stepped in to help Downtown Springfield Incorporated.
Congratulations.
So they then went on to discuss all the things that Downtown Springfield Incorporated does for the city. They help manage the downtown farmers market. They help navigate ordinances that new businesses might have to face. They help these new businesses in downtown Springfield deal with a whole host of things. They have awards galas they hold, and really it's a business association, a private business association. But the city does regularly, I think most recently they gave like $100,000, if not more, to Downtown Springfield Incorporated. But some questions that came in include Alderman Williams asking pointedly what's going to happen with this money. How's this money going to be used?
The $50,000, did that go to a certain salary or a certain person, or the general pot, or what?
So, yes and yes. It's the $50,000 is unrestricted as to use, but generally, it plays a big role in payment of salaries specifically. Our former executive director came to work for the city, and so our next executive director, that $50,000 would be going towards his or her salary. That's typically where it goes every year.
By the way, I think I see one of my buddies, Jeff, in the audience back there. That's interesting. Another follow-up question from Alderman Williams about these dollars.
By the nature of the projects, that this is a drop in the bucket. My other question goes to, if you didn't get the $50,000, which one of these projects wouldn't happen, or would cease, or would it all still go on?
No. The answer to your question, the yes or no answer to your question is no. It would not all go on. We would have to find somewhere to cut. In some ways, you're asking me to pick which child had to go, because these are all really important projects and really important roles that DSI played. Honestly, it's that not having the city as a financial partner, I'll just be really blunt, Alderman, would be kind of a nightmare scenario for us. And so I don't know that I can give you an answer there, because I really hope I don't have to sit down with our board and make that decision.
So again, $50,000 in city funds, expecting to go to Downtown Springfield Incorporated. Final comments here from Tony Shearing on the board of DSI.
And I completely understand the concern, and I totally understand there's never enough money to go around. But the work that we're doing, I would submit, has an impact on every ward, even though it's only focused on downtown specifically.
I can only hope so. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So there you go. Some of the back and forth there over subsidies for Downtown Springfield Incorporated. Then it was time for new and unfinished business. Alderman Rockford had questions for the city's Public Works Department because of a recent headline.
With the news of the rail project being delayed, pushed back, that is not going to delay any demos.
No,
correct?
sir. No, sir. The resources are available. The contract has been passed, and we're at the point now where it really is a matter of scheduling with the contractor.
Okay.
So, but they're talking about there is this headline from the State Journal Register: Springfield Rail Improvement Project takes a major blow. Feds deny crucial funding, and this was on Friday. This was announced, and it talks about the Springfield Rail Improvement Project denied $138 million grant requests necessary to complete the final portions of the project. That's a big, big sum of money for this project, which I think costs more than $400 million. So obviously some things are going to continue to go on there. It is the Council Corral. I am Greg Bishop. Just lost my monitors here. Let's see if I could have these on a timer, actually. And as you can see, we're going a little bit beyond time here. So let me make sure I've got these things turned back on so I can at least see what I'm doing here. Because quite frankly, I don't have that at the moment. So we'll turn monitors on, monitors on, monitors on, and monitors on. Let's see if we can get this all set up. Okay, here we go. All right, I think, look at that. And I didn't lose you guys. Sweet. So yeah, just powering the monitors there. But back to the issue of the rail development program getting a little bit of a hiccup with the lack of federal funds. Alderman Gregory has other questions.
The Jefferson and Madison underpasses will be completed still, or are we?
Yes. Okay. Those are on track. The funds that were not made available are concerned with usable segment 6, A and B, which is the far northern element of it. But to Alderman Rockford's question, the demolition of the houses on 10th Street, 10th and Reservoir, they're on North Grand, that's all been slated, and it's just a matter of scheduling the contractor to come in and do the work.
So ultimately, city officials saying that the city's portion of this, not impacted by the feds, not granting that $130 million grant to Sangamon County. So a different body of government there. So interesting to see that come up here. Alderman Brad Carlson had similar questions about this, saying that it's important that everybody knows that this is going to impact the city of Springfield.
The rail project is sometimes really out of our scope, but it does affect the city of Springfield, and I don't know if there's anything we can do, so as far as any resolution or a letter sent to DOT or anything like that, but
I've gotten a few phone calls from my constituents saying, hey, the city should do something. I'm like, well, it's not necessarily out of our scope, but at the same time, it does affect the city of Springfield.
Right, so I can talk with Public Works to see how that impacts us and who their contacts are and see if there's anything we can do. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I just think a show of support that, hey, it does affect us and if something, just that, a show of support. And
So interesting, again, to hear how the different levels of government, from the federal government to the county government to the city government, are being impacted by this. Final comment here from Alderman Carlson, in particular, about the question of crime. And there was a story out of News Channel 20 that shows numerous juveniles got in a fight at White Oaks Mall, the mall here in Springfield, about 6:45 on Tuesday. Several officers responded to White Oaks Mall in reference to a report of numerous juveniles fighting inside. We're told the fight happened near the center of the mall. Mall security officers went and reported the problem to an off-duty Springfield police officer there, and found individuals ages 16 and 14 in a fight. So obviously some questions about the mall and the security at the mall. Here's Brad Carlson.
I know there was an incident last night at the mall, 30 juveniles, and I think there were 3 arrests. And I've talked to the chief about this previously. I mean, I guess it was in the center of the mall. I'm not, I'm not pointing out any particular business there, but I think we got rid of that substation a few years ago, and I did bring it up to the chief, like I said, a few months ago. We've got new businesses there. We've got Malibu Jacks coming in, and obviously within a year or so, we have another 300 or 400 employees coming in EPA. So I, for one, am going to continue the talks and talk to the chief about seeing what we can do to get that substation back in there in light of what happened last night.
So again, new unfinished business. Always interesting to hear what's on the mind of our elected officials in the city of Springfield. And the recommendation there of having a substation for police at the mall, especially with new businesses coming. And there's an expansion that's being built onto the mall to have Illinois Environmental Protection Agency employees there. They've been working on that for a while too. So there you go. That's your Council Corral here with Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Support the show by buying some merchandise. All right, we'll see you next time. We'll be back at it live and local here tomorrow morning with Bishop on Air. All right, programming note, as you know, the New Year's holiday is just around the corner, but clearly I'm not going to be on January 1st. So still plan on doing some live documentary of the state's gun and magazine ban law and how we've gotten to this point. So hopefully you are there for that as well. But I got to get out of here. Holy cow, what a long show this has been. Appreciate you guys taking the time with us with Bishop on Air.